All right, good evening, everybody. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work in the traditional territory of the Ottawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Now, that being said, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. I'm Craig Kaplan. I'm a professor in computer science. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here to this talk by Cory Doctorow. I'd like to thank the School of Computer Science and Director Mark Giesbrecht for making this possible. I would also like to thank the members of the staff who made this event actually happen, in particular Diana Timmermans, who did a lot of the organizational work. Yes, thank you, Diana. All right, now, as many of you know, this is the 50th anniversary year of the Faculty of Mathematics at the University of Waterloo. Specifically, it's also the 50th anniversary of computer science through its incarnations, first as the Department of Applied Analysis in Computer Science, then Department and then School of Computer Science, and most recently the David R. Cheriton School of Computer Science. We've held a sequence of events throughout the year to celebrate our history and our accomplishments, and so it seemed natural to finish off the year with a look at the present and the future of computers and computer science. And who better to peer into that future for us than Cory? So as you may know, Cory Doctorow is a science fiction author, activist, journalist, and blogger. It's hard to put those in any particular order because he does all of them so wonderfully. He's the co-editor of a website, Boing Boing, you may have visited occasionally. He's also the author of Walk Away, a novel for adults, a young adult graphic novel called In Real Life, the nonfiction business book, Information Doesn't Want to Be Free, young adult novels like Rapture and the Nerds, Homeland, Pirate Cinema, and Little Brother, you get the categories right, and novels for adults like Rapture of the Nerds and Makers. He works for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is an MIT Media Lab research affiliate, is a visiting professor of computer science at Open University, and co-founder of the UK Open Rights Group. He was, for a time, an undergraduate here at UW, and later became the first independent studies scholar in virtual residence here at the University of Waterloo. He was born in Toronto, Canada, and now lives in Los Angeles. So just a few logistical notes, please, if you'll allow me. Please silence your phones, of course. Cory will be very happy to take questions after the end of his talk, so stay tuned for that. And after that, he will be outside where he will be happily signing books, if you are interested. But we ask that you please remain seated until he is actually up and out of the room so that he can get to the place where the signing will happen. So all that being said, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Cory Doctorow.
Thank you. Thank you all very much, and especially thank you, Diana, and thank you, Craig, for all of the hard logistical work that you did. I know that I'm not the world's most responsive correspondent when I'm on the road, and you did outstanding yeoman work. The reason I'm here is that you have such great administrative nous. So I want to talk tonight a little bit about metaphors and where they take us somewhere good and where they lead us astray. To be clear, I'm not anti-metaphor. I'm a novelist. It would be very hard for me to brief against metaphors. But metaphors can definitely get us into a lot of trouble. So for example, this is not a trash can. You can drag files that aren't files and folders that aren't folders into this not a trash can and not empty it. And when you don't not empty it, those files, they don't disappear because this isn't a trash can and those weren't files. Those were entries in a file system. And what that file system did was maintain a database that said your file called secretplan.doc was located in these sectors. And that keeps other files that are also not files from being written onto those sectors so that your file doesn't actually get trashed, and once again, that's not a trash can. But when you delete secretplan.doc by dragging it into the trash, your computer just erases its entry in the file system database. And anyone who knows where to look can find it later. And this is how many criminals end up being unpleasantly surprised when the police seize their computer and haul it off to a forensics lab and recover those not trashed, not files. So this problem, it's called metaphor debt. And metaphors, they extend credit to us in the form of these easy to grasp abstractions And then they exact a fee from us. They charge us interest in the form of shear between those abstract handles and the underlying technical reality. And metaphor debt can be very toxic. It's the worst kind of debt because it's impossible to know how much interest you're paying on it. It's impossible to know how much debt you're amassing. And it's a particular problem in technology because technology, we almost always describe it in terms of metaphors. No one reaches into their computer anymore and twiddles the zeros and ones. We operate in bits that we abstract to bytes, and then we abstract those to operators, and abstract those to programming languages, and then abstract those to GUIs, and then we extract those to like fat finger presses on capacitive screens. So the 1980s, they were a boundless source of metaphor debt. In the 1980s, there were these two competing standards for television in the world. There was NTSC, which we used here in Canada. It stood for Never Twice the Same Color. And there was PAL, which was mostly in the EU. And this lets studios stagger their releases. If you released a video only on PAL, even if people brought it home from Europe to Canada, they couldn't watch it. And so you could promise your distribution partners in Europe that your video would not be released in Canada, or you could promise your Canadian distributors that it wouldn't be released in Europe, and the way that they would know that for sure is that you would only release it in one of those formats. But then along came DVD players, and DVD players were digital, and so they could output NTSC or PAL, and that made release windowing hard. Another example of this was the Sega Dreamcast and other games consoles of the era. Digital multi-protocol outputs posed a real problem for these devices because the manufacturers were accustomed to windowing their releases as well. And they had this very sweet racket in the form of game duplication fees. If you were an independent game developer and you wanted to make your game available on a Dreamcast, you had to pay Dreamcast to duplicate the CDs at an enormous markup that was in no way reflective of the underlying costs. It was pure profit-taking for Sega. It's a pretty good deal for them. And they designed their devices to reject any DVD that did not appear to have come off of one of their, or CD that did not appear to come off of one of their presses. This let Sega get a piece of the action every time someone wanted to sell a game to a Sega owner. They could collect rent by standing in the middle of every one of those transactions in the market, doing nothing except operating a commodity CD pressing plant. But the reality is that both of those devices were experiencing a metaphor debt. A DVD player is not a VHS cassette player that takes round, flat cassettes. It's a general purpose, Turing-complete, von Neumann architecture computer capable of executing any instruction that we can express in symbolic logic that happens to be connected to an optical drive. And a Dreamcast is not a pinball machine in a small black plastic box. It's a general-purpose, Turing-complete, von Neumann architecture computer capable of expressing any instruction that we can express in symbolic logic that happens to be connected to an optical drive. So in 1998, the US Congress decided to turn this metaphor debt into law. And then it was followed in 2012 with a Canadian copycat law called Bill C-11, sponsored by Tony Clement and James Moore, which is something of a national embarrassment. It's one thing to get computers very, very wrong in 1998 when we thought giant VR helmets would be the future instead of slightly more compact VR helmets. But to still be making those dumb mistakes in 2011, it's just felony stupid, right? You're just not paying attention. And these laws prohibited bypassing any effective means of access control that restricted access to a copyrighted work. Now, this odd bit of jargon had a real purpose, and that was to ensure that you, the owner of a Turing-complete von Neumann architecture general-purpose computer capable of executing any instruction that we can express in symbolic logic, not to execute some instructions that made the manufacturer sad. And to understand how that works, I'm going to give you a very quick primer on how crypto works, because this is all built up out of cryptography primitives. Now, in normal crypto, we have this kind of hypothetical example of Alice and Bob and Carol. Alice and Bob and Carol are locked in this kind of eternal rivalry. Alice and Bob want to talk to each other, and Carol wants to eavesdrop on them and interfere with their communications. And so Alice and Bob need secret codes to communicate. And Alice and Bob make some assumptions about who Carol is and what she knows about what they're doing. Now, the first assumption that they make, and it's not intuitive at first, is that Carol can probably get a copy of their message. And the reason for that is that Alice and Bob aren't handing their messages hand to hand. If that was the case, they could just have privacy. They're communicating over public networks. Maybe they're in the same room and using a Wi-Fi network, and anyone else who's within range of that radiating radio in a Wi-Fi access point can see the message as it traverses our electromagnetic spectrum. Or maybe they're using a satellite, and anyone who's on the same continent as them can receive the message. Or maybe Carol works with a phone company, and they're transmitting this over their internet line. Or maybe Carol works in the office of their university and can tap into the university's network. So it's a pretty good assumption that Carol can gain access to their message, because if you assume that Carol won't get access to your message, then you probably have a very brittle security model. There are so many ways that that model can break that you can never really be sure whether it's intact. And Alice and Bob, they make another assumption. They assume that Carol knows what they did to scramble the message. And the reason for that, again, isn't immediately intuitive, but when you think about it in the context of a university, it may become clearer. Before we had contemporary knowledge creation, before the Enlightenment, we had the Dark Ages. And in the Dark Ages, knowledge creation was called alchemy. And alchemists did what scientists do with a major exception. So what alchemists would do is they would observe a phenomenon in the world. They would hypothesize a causal relationship. This happens because that happened. They would devise an experiment to validate whether or not their hypothesis was true. And they would perform the experiment. But then they wouldn't tell anyone else what they thought they'd learned from their experiment. Now, human beings are really good at kidding ourselves, right? If you've ever had an argument with someone who was clearly just kidding themselves about some dumb choice they'd made, maybe, you and your spouse are arguing over who chose that crappy restaurant for dinner, and you're sure it was you and they're sure it was them, or you're sure it was them and they're sure it was you. We're really good at rationalizing our own mistakes. And this is why every alchemist discovered for himself in the hardest way possible that you shouldn't drink mercury. But eventually, alchemists did convert something base into something noble. They took the base metal of superstition and converted it to knowledge by running it through a process called adversarial peer review, where they told other people what they thought they knew, and not just their friends. They told people who hated them what they thought they knew. And they let people who were emotionally invested in proving that they were wrong try to prove them wrong. And through that crucible, they were able to make something that was provisional into something that was sound, something that they could really know. Well, anyone can design a security system that works so well that they themselves can't think of a way of breaking it. That just means you've designed a security system that works on people stupider than you. And so Alice and Bob, when they devise their cipher to scramble their message, they tell everyone they can find, and including and especially the people they're worried about eavesdropping on them, what system they're using. And they wait for them to tell them what dumb mistakes they've made. And then they fix those mistakes. And this continuous process, this knowledge creation process, is how we arrive at ciphers that are very strong and very solid and very well understood. So you may ask yourself, if Carol has a copy of the message, and Carol knows what was done to the message to make it unreadable, then why can't Carol then render it readable? And the answer is that ciphers, scrambling algorithms, they use keys. And the ciphers are so well designed that with a decent key, you can take a message and using a commodity computer, that distraction rectangle in your pocket, you can use it to scramble a message so thoroughly that if every hydrogen in the atom in the universe was a computer, and it did nothing until the end of the universe but try and figure out what your key is, you run out of universe before you run out of keys. And so Alice and Bob know that Carol can't eavesdrop on them, right? But then you get into some metaphor debt with the Sega Dreamcast model, with the DVD player model, with the Netflix model. So here's the Netflix model. I'm Netflix, I'm Bob, you're everyone else in the world, you're Alice, and I want to send you a movie, I want you to pay me for it, but I don't want you to be able to do whatever you want with it. Like especially, I don't want you to save it to your hard drive and share it with your friends. So I encrypt the movie, right? Okay, so far so good. The movie's encrypted, so you can't gain access to it, even if you had a whole universe's worth of computers to do it. But you're not going to buy the movie from me. unless I also tell you how to decrypt it. And so I give you the key. But if you have the key, then you can decrypt it, save it to your hard drive, and share it with your friends. And so instead what I do is I take the key and I hide it in a program, like a browser plugin or an app, and I give that to you. And I then hope that you never look at that app and figure out where I hid the key. This security model has a name. It's called wishful thinking. Because even really good hiding places become transparent to people who have uninterrupted leisure time on facilities of their choosing to search. Really, really, really good bank safes are not kept in bank robbers' living rooms. They're kept in bank vaults. Because it doesn't matter how good your bank safe is, if you give it to the bank robber to take home, they'll eventually open it. So we don't have Alice and Bob and Carol. We have Alice and Bob. And you are Alice, and you is a bored grad student with an electron tunneling microscope that no one's using this weekend, a talented hobbyist who's got a weekend off to try and decap the chip and try and find the cryptographic secrets hidden in it, or a rival with their own clean room lab. And so every one of these systems, these so-called digital rights management systems that are supposed to protect copyright, they're devised over the course of years by skilled engineers who spend millions of dollars. And then they're broken in hours by bored teenagers using hobbyist equipment. And it's not because the engineers are stupid or foolish, it's because they've done something foolish. They've tried to hide something in a device they give to their adversary. This metaphor debt, it's a kind of voodoo crypto. It has the external appearance of crypto, but it's not crypto. Here's something else it's not. It's not stopping piracy. Think of these examples. Watching a movie that you buy overseas from the store that is selling the movie on behalf of the copyright proprietor in a different country from the country you bought it in is not piracy. That is the literal, non-hyperbolic opposite of piracy. Paying the copyright owner's agent the money that they ask for the work that they made is not piracy and cannot be piracy. Installing an app or a game on a device that you own, made by the rights holder and purchased direct from the rights holder, without paying tolls to the manufacturer, is not piracy. Buying a copyrighted work from the creator and running it on a computer you own is the literal non-hyperbolic opposite of piracy. What these things do is they allow firms to create new rights out of thin air. They can create the right to decide what country you watch your movie in, the right to decide who you buy your software from. And the metaphor debt turns into metaphor shear. Because a computer designed not to do something the manufacturer dislikes is not a computer that is incapable of doing something the manufacturer doesn't like. It's not an incapable computer. It's a disobedient computer. It's a computer that when you ask it to do something it knows how to do, it says, "I can't let you do that, Dave." Now, to make this model work, you need to declare war on the very idea of general purpose computing. Turing completeness, after all, is a property that's very hard to get away from in computing. So Turing completeness is this beautiful idea that came out of the World War II effort to build code-breaking machines. It's the idea that rather than building a specialized electromechanical calculator to calculate a ballistic table, and another one to calculate an actuarial table, and another one to count the vote, that you could create a general purpose computer that could run all the programs we can think of. And this turned out to be this fantastic innovation. And then we realized that it was something of a two-edged sword, because there's many times where it would be nice not to have Turing completeness. Like back before Facebook took over all social media forever, we used to have social media startups. And the social media startups would try to tempt in new users by doing things like having glitter unicorn GIFs. It is pronounced GIF. And they would script the unicorn GIF with a toy programming language that would let you make it dance across the top of your page. And it would have like 3 instructions. And 6 months later, some smartass like Sammy Kamkar would do a paper at DEF CON or Black Hat and say, you know those 3 instructions? I built up out of them the full Turing-complete instruction set. I wrote a virus in unicorn GIF programming language, and it's infected every page on the social network, right? Or we make printer languages to describe printer pages, languages like PostScript, to describe where on the page lines should fall. And that's all they're supposed to do. And then someone squints hard at PostScript and they go, you know, the primitives that make up PostScript can be combined and recombined and built up into a full Turing-complete instruction set, and now you've got printer viruses. You want printer viruses? That's how you get printer viruses. Or Magic the Gathering. It turns out that with a large enough deck of Magic the Gathering cards and enough time, you can make Turing-complete Magic the Gathering programs. And what it means that these things are all Turing-complete is that you can run any program on them. Now, albeit some of them will run slower than others. If you want to run Photoshop on Magic the Gathering, you need a very large deck and a lot of friends and probably more time than remains between now and the slow cooling off of the universe. But in theory, you can do it. And the problem we have is that half-smart regulators are trapped in metaphor. To see how that works, look at the crypto wars that we're fighting now, where lawmakers all over the world are declaring that we can't make a computer that can run working crypto. We should only make computers that run crypto that is fatally compromised with a secret backdoor that only lawmakers are supposed to know about, so they can always read what the bad guys are saying. This is an equal opportunity madness. In 2012, then Security Minister Vic Teaves said, we are proposing measures to bring our laws into the 21st century and to provide the police with the lawful tools that they need. You either stand with us or you stand with the child pornographers. Just earlier this year, the Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, said, the laws of mathematics are very commendable, but the only law that applies in Australia is the law of Australia. And then this year, Deputy Attorney General Rod J. Rosenstein said responsible encryption is achievable. Responsible encryption can involve effective, secure encryption that allows access only with judicial authorization. They think that the nerds are mulishly refusing to bend on a point of principle, that we are aesthetically opposed to Turing incompleteness. They don't understand that we dream of the day we can make printers that don't get viruses from printing pages, that we dream of the day that our glitter unicorn GIFs can run free. They think that they can just shout, you nerds, nerd harder, until we figure out how to make crypto that works when bad guys are trying to hack our pacemakers and our finances and our automobiles and the seismic dampers that keep our skyscrapers from falling down and our airplanes, but fails catastrophically the very minute a cop needs it to. And they are convinced that this impossible thing is possible. And when powerful people demand the impossible, terrible things happen. When they force us all to swallow the fly, then they have to force feed us the spider, and the bird, and the cat, and the cow, and the horse. And we know how that story ends. So think of how you would keep non-compliant, crypto-capable hardware out of Canada. Well, for starters, you'd have to confiscate every device that entered the country and either fit it with some spyware that stopped the user from installing working crypto, or simply take it away and replace it with a compliant device. You would need a national firewall, and it would have to have a whitelist of those websites that the authorities were absolutely certain did not host working crypto code that people could download and run on their computers. An enormous chunk of the computer science curriculum taught in this university and universities across the country would have to be expunged, and huge pieces of the library in this facility would have to be taken out and put under lock and key. The confiscation of every Turing-complete computer in Canada, or some kind of retrofitting of all those devices with disobedient OSs, would have to follow. And we would have to, again, fit every device in Canada that already exists, all the way back to that PC Junior, with some kind of spyware that stops you from installing working crypto on it. The disobedient computer is the worst kind of technology debt. It's the kind that mounts up compound interest. Because in order for a disobedient computer to work, in order for a computer to treat its owner as its adversary and try to thwart what the owner is doing, it has to sneak. It has to lie. If there was a program on your desktop called HAL9000.exe, you would drag it into the trash. right? You would open your process monitor and kill it -9 with extreme prejudice, right? So in order for that program to work, it has to not have a locatable file in your file system. It has to be obfuscated in some way. It has to run in a zone that is not enumerated in your process monitor. Now, not only does this mean that your computer is doing things that the manufacturer intends that you don't want to do, but your manufacturer is practicing alchemy and not telling anyone else how it works. And so they probably made some dumb mistakes no one informed them of, which means that if some bad guy figures out how to run code in that ring -1, of that hidden zone of your computer, by design, nothing you do can detect that it's running or stop it from running on your computer. The metaphor debt invites us to view disobedient computers as features and not bugs. Every company, after all, could make more money for its shareholders if we were all forced to use their products in ways that maximized their return on investment instead of our utility from our property. Imagine if you could sell someone a car with a cigarette lighter that wouldn't accept a USB charger until they upgraded the car to get the USB charging feature. This is not entirely hypothetical. In 1956, AT&T went to court over a device called the Hushaphone. Now, AT&T maintained that any device that was plugged into the phone network endangered the phone network, and they got Congress and the FCC to ban people from connecting things to the network without their permission. One of the devices they sued over is a plastic cup you fit over the mouthpiece of your phone so that you could talk into it without eavesdroppers being able to hear you, the Hushaphone. And they were eventually told by the courts that we couldn't find any reason to believe that this would damage the network. And the fact that you could sell a Hushaphone for more than the manufacturer doesn't mean you get to stop the manufacturer from selling it. But after all, this is the company that went on to charge us for caller ID. That's the from line in your email, right? Imagine if your ISP could charge you extra to see who the email was from before you read it. When companies can force their customers to pay for the full enjoyment of their property, they do. So this is how net neutrality opponents advance their cause. They analogize the internet to a cable system, and they ask why they shouldn't be able to charge extra for more channels. The internet is a general purpose network. That's why. It's not a glorified video on demand service. It's not the world's greatest porn distribution system. It's not a tool for recruiting jihadis. It is the nervous system of the 21st century. And everything we do today involves the internet, and everything we do tomorrow will require the internet. And the only way that regulating it as though it were an entertainment medium can sound like a good idea is if you deploy weaponized bad metaphors. These laws, these anti-circumvention laws, invite manufacturers to see opportunities for this lockdown everywhere. Inkjet printers are kind of the canonical example. In March 2016, HP pushed out a fake security update to tens of millions of OfficeJet and OfficeJet Pro printers. Owners of those printers found the LCD on the front panel displaying a message telling them that they had a security update. They tapped OK to install it, and nothing happened, just like every other security update you've ever installed. But inside the printer, something did happen. The printer now had a Manchurian program, a sleeper program, that counted down silently for 6 months. And then in September of 2016, all of those printers awoke and began to check to see whether they had original ink cartridges or refilled or third-party ink cartridges. And if they found that they weren't running original new ink cartridges, they refused to print with them. Now, people didn't know what went on. They filed bug reports with their printer cartridge manufacturers. They threw away their printers because they thought, oh, it's another one that's bitten the dust. But eventually we figured out what they'd done. And HP had deliberately reached into tens of millions of people's houses and tricked them into breaking their printers for having the audacity to not arrange their affairs to the maximum benefit of HP shareholders. And after a great outcry, they promised they wouldn't do it again without telling us. But then they did it again without telling us this September. Now, once it was possible to use anti-circumvention to make it a literal felony to use your property in ways that upset the manufacturer, it was inevitable that we'd get more of it. For example, in 2012, Philips pushed an update out to its light sockets so they wouldn't take third-party light bulbs. Now, the DMCA and laws like Bill C-11 don't just give companies the right to dictate how you may use the product, but because of the old lady who swallowed the fly, because knowing how the product works can help you dismantle this control, these laws also make it a crime for computer scientists and other researchers to look inside them and report on their security defects, because disclosure of those defects helps people who want to break these control systems. And so in these products, the defects fester, and they are quietly exploited by bad guys, not researchers who want to sound the alarm, but bad guys who want to operationalize them in the form of exploits. And that goes on until the exploit is so widely deployed that no one can deny its existence anymore. In November 2016, researchers from the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel is the only country in the world that's industrialized that hasn't got one of these laws, disclosed a defect in the Zigbee protocol used for Internet of Things networking. It's the same one that those Philips light bulbs use. And they showed that they could write a drone-transmitted worm that would take over every Zigbee-connected system in a city in 5 minutes. And they could then use those compromised devices to hack into the owner's networks, because every one of those devices is a computer. A Philips light bulb is a computer connected to a light bulb. So every device that's insecure and connected to your network is an attack surface, a vector for bad things. And punishing people who warn you about it means that those bad things happen more often to more people. Here are a few examples. In February 2017, this year, this company, CloudPets, made the news. Now, they're a Romanian company. Their share price at the time that they made the news was down 98%, and it appears no one was working there anymore. They make internet-connected toys. The toy has a Wi-Fi access point in it, and it connects to a Bluetooth or to an app that you run on your mobile device. Once you've paired the two of these things, your child can squeeze the toy and say, "Mommy, I love you," and your phone beeps, and out of your phone comes, "Mommy, I love you," and you can tap the reply icon, and you can record, "Kid, I love you too," and it comes out of the toy. They sold 2 million of these, and they put all of the user credentials and all of their billing information in every one of these messages in a non-password protected, unencrypted database in an Amazon Web Services virtual machine that was exposed to the whole world. And researchers discovered these messages. And these messages are not just anodyne, "Mommy, I love you," or "Where are the cookies?" or "Can I have a sleepover tonight?" It's also stuff you really wouldn't want to see make the rounds on the internet. You know, "I'm scared, Mommy, I'm alone in the hospital," or "Don't worry, kid, Mommy will come home from the hospital soon." And those messages were in this database that security researchers discovered, along with multiple notes from criminals who had discovered the open database and left messages for the administrators saying, "Send us some Bitcoin, or we're going to republish this all over the web," over and over again, over the course of months, no one answering. And the security researchers, they called and no one answered, and they emailed and no one answered. And eventually their consciences wouldn't let them rest anymore, and they publicly disclosed it. Or this guy. In January 2016, San Francisco had a 48-hour news blip because a mom discovered that her toddler was afraid of their baby monitor. They said, "The phone in my room scares me at night." So she was walking past the kid's room one night, and she heard a stranger's voice swearing at her baby out of the baby monitor. She walked into the room, and the baby monitor's steerable camera swiveled around to look at her, and some rando said, "Uh-oh, Mommy's here." And the baby monitor went dark, and she never found out who it was. At CES in 2016, they unveiled the Internet of Things rectal thermometer. We literally have these unreportable attack surfaces up our literal, non-figurative asses. Now, companies don't add these control technologies and invoke them because they want you to be insecure. They do it because they're pursuing a petty and illegitimate advantage in the marketplace, and they're indifferent to the security implications of that advantage. So think of the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, when Netflix started mailing out their red envelopes. They called this theft. They said going to the store and buying a DVD and then mailing it around to multiple people and getting it back from them was a form of theft. But there was no layer of technology that Netflix had to circumvent in order to do this. And so they were able to go on doing it with impunity. But then flash forward to this year. This year, there was major work done on the standardization of HTML5, the language that describes the web. Standardization of HTML5 takes place at the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, a long-standing champion of the open web, one of the great promulgators of open standards. And in 2013, Netflix went to the W3C, and they said, unless you standardize a way to make it easy for us to put these systems of control in browsers, systems that override owners of the browser so that we can show them a movie without them saving it. So we can pretend that there's a thing called streaming that isn't just a consensus hallucination, as though there was some way you could watch a movie on your computer without downloading it, like the internet was made up of toilet paper rolls with mirrors in them. They said, unless you give us this, we're going to boycott the web. There will be no premium video visible in a browser. It'll just be apps. And then your relevance will sunset, the web will disappear. Save the web by giving us these control systems. And we in the form of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, joined the W3C over this. And we said, you mustn't do this. It's a terrible day for the web. And they said, no, you've really just got a problem with this law that protects these technologies. And we don't do law here. We just do the technology side. And we said, you kind of do the law here because you have a patent agreement. You say that if you have a patent and you come to the W3C, you can't use that patent to stop people from implementing the standards we make here. Well, people who make these control systems, they're also going to get a legal right from copyright. Let's just say that they can't use it to stop people who aren't committing piracy. So we said, we'll just amend the user agreement so that these rights can only be invoked in a case where there's some other charge, copyright infringement, inducement to copyright infringement, theft of trade secrets, tortious interference with a contract, trademark infringement. But you can't invoke it if I want to make a look-ahead algorithm that checks to see whether my Netflix video is about to strobe and inflict a photosensitive epileptic seizure on me. The woman at my mailbox where I get my mail, she has photosensitive epilepsy. The only time she was ever hospitalized for it was when she had 5 seizures in a row watching Netflix. You can't invoke it when someone wants to use machine learning to do better captioning. You can't invoke it when a security researcher discovers a defect that exposes everything you do in your browser, your banking, your medical stuff, your employment, to invasion by hackers. You can't invoke it when people want to archive it in national deposit archives. You can't invoke it in circumstances where someone wants to do to you what you just did to the Motion Picture Association of America. They want to do something legal that you don't like. They want to gore your rocks. We took piracy off the table to check to see why they were there. And what they said is, we are absolutely unwilling to negotiate any of that. We will only stay in the room if we can reserve the right to do all of those things if the mood takes us. And in a shameful moment, the W3C broke with its 25-year tradition of only making standards by consensus and held a majoritarian vote that went 58% in favor, and they published this standard. When your devices don't obey you, when the dead hand of the manufacturer lies on them, waiting to slap you for failing to optimize your affairs to benefit their shareholders, you are no longer the owner of your property. You are the tenant of your property. And we have a name for systems where only a small elite get to own property and everyone else uses it at their sufferance and to their benefit. It's called feudalism. But in traditional feudalism, at least we had a human aristocracy. In digital feudalism, only artificial life forms, these colony organisms that use humans as their gut flora, called limited liability corporations, are allowed to own property. And we use it on the terms that they set. We're one vision system away from a toaster that won't toast unauthorized bread. We are one RFID away from a dishwasher that won't wash unauthorized third-party dishes. And it will be a felony to reconfigure them because anti-circumvention law makes no distinction between Apple getting to decide who can sell you apps for the phone in your pocket than a KitchenAid doing the same thing with a toaster on your counter. Enough is enough. Economists talk about something called a Ulysses Pact. It's named after one of the first hackers, Ulysses. He sailed into the siren-infested waters, where the song of the siren would lure sailors to their death. They would jump over the sides. Now, the traditional protocol for this was to pour wax in your ears so you couldn't hear their songs. But he was a hacker, and he wanted to hear the song but survive. So he had his sailors lash him to the mast so that when he was weak, he would be protected by the person he was before when he was strong. And we use these Ulysses packs all the time in our lives. Have you ever gone on a diet and thrown away all the Oreos? Right? That's a thing that you do now to protect yourself in the future. And I'm going to propose a Ulysses pact to you now as practitioners of technology and as instructors of technology. It comes in two parts. The first one is that devices should always obey their owners. Whenever there is a conflict between the instructions given to the device by its owner and by a remote party, no matter who that party is, no matter that it's the government, the military, the police, the manufacturer, their teachers, their parents, the device always obeys the owner. Not because nothing bad ever happens when devices obey their owners, but because everything that happens when devices don't obey their owners is worse. The second one is that security defects are always legal to disclose under every circumstance. Telling the truth about things in computers should never be illegal. Not because people can't make mischief with irresponsible disclosure, but because giving companies a veto over who gets to tell you bad news about their products, making them custodians of things that make their share prices go down, never ends well. Here's why software is eating the world. It's general purposeness. Every device is a computer attached to an exotic peripheral. Insulin pumps, operating theaters, nuclear missiles. Every one of those devices benefits when software improves and when computers improve. And so everything that can be computerized will be, and as soon as it is, it will get better when anything else that is connected to a computer gets better too. The W3C was our canary in the coal mine. Can our existing open institutions be strong enough to resist the forces of control, reaction, greed, and depraved indifference? The canary died. We have to fight this, and it's not a fight we win on our own. It's a group effort, and we need you. As we teach the computer scientists and practitioners of tomorrow, we must imbue them with a sense of the gravitas of their mission. They are now the animators that breathe life into every object in our lives. We can no longer allow bad metaphors to flourish, even if they make for convenient ways of simplifying complicated tools. Now, lucky for us, we are approaching peak indifference, the moment at which the number of people whose lives have been touched by this only goes up, and then the number of people who want to do something about it only goes up. And unlucky for us, we're in a race between peak indifference and the point of no return. We are pumping bad metaphors into our computers like we pumped CO2 into the atmosphere. And we're in a race to figure out whether we wake up and do something about it before there's so much of it there that it may be impossible to stop. If we lose this fight, we lose everything. Because everything in the world depends on how we make our computers work. And what a tawdry dystopia to end up in. One where our entertainment technology is the handmaiden of totalitarianism. What a terrible world to be Huxleyed into the full Orwell. Now, the world has more important problems than the internet and its future. How we solve problems of climate and gender and racial inequality and wealth inequality, all of those problems are much more important than the internet. But all those fights are going to be won or lost on the internet. And if we can't keep the internet free, fair, and open, we lose those fights before we start. Metaphors cost something. There's a metaphor that floats around when we talk about computers, that information wants to be free. To get to the bottom of this, I invited information for a weekend in the Muskokas. And we built a sweat lodge. We cried about our parents. We drank oaky Chardonnay, and at the end, information gave me a long, soulful, manly hug. I smelled the wood smoke in its beard, and it whispered its secret into my ear. It told me that it doesn't want to be free. It just wants us to stop anthropomorphizing it. Because information doesn't want anything. It's an abstraction. But people want to be free. And the way you make people free in a world where information technology is the force that animates everything is by making sure that computers are programmed by people and not the other way around. The people who saw the power of computers, the so-called techno-utopians that it's so fashionable to rubbish these days, 25 years ago, they didn't think that in the future we were going to have computers that would automatically be great. They thought that in the future our computers could be very scary indeed. They thought that it would be awesome if we didn't screw it up. Now, as my friend Aaron Swartz said, in the last year he was alive, in 2013, it's 2013 and it's no longer okay for our leaders not to understand how our technology works. You who know how the internet works, you have a duty to find ways not to just make it easy for people to use computers, but to understand computers. Your foreseeable future will be filled with people who pressure you to make bad metaphors real, to break your crypto, to add control systems like digital rights management to your tools, to deneutralize the net. And you can fight them. With the help of everyone, you can fight them. Because we all depend on this internet, on this nervous system of the 21st century, and the race between indifference and the point of no return is up for grabs, and you can help pick the winner. Organizations like CIPIC here in Canada, the Free Software Foundation, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and the Electronic Frontiers Alliance, a campus network that you can get involved with and start a local chapter of here at the University of Waterloo, need your support. But not just in the form of your most welcome and needed memberships and donations. We need your support to help us win this race between peak indifference and the point of no return. To build a future in which the computers are programmed by people and not one in which people are programmed by computers. And together we can realize that dream. Thank you. So I'm going to take some questions now. I have a few notes about how the questions work. I think they're going to bring out some mics, is that right? So I like to call alternately on people who identify as women or non-binary and people who identify as male or non-binary, back and forth, turn and turn. And I remind you that a long rambling statement followed by what do you think of that is technically a question, but it is not a good question. So if we could start, if there are any people who identify as female or non-binary who'd like to kick us off with the first question, that would be great. So I work with a, oh, go ahead, yeah. Do you want to grab the mic? Great. Thank you.
So the first point you have on top about devices obeying their owners, one thing I specifically look at is robots that social engineer people. How do you think robots and other devices becoming more personable is going to affect how all of this works?
That is an excellent question. And it's a tricky one. So what I'm going to say is I want to cleave the question of how it works from how it fails. I am only a pretend computer scientist. I have a fake degree. I attended Waterloo. I didn't graduate from Waterloo. I dropped out of 4 undergraduate programs. I have a purely honorary degree. And so I'm not going to tell you how to write code, but I'm going to tell you how we find out whether the code you write is bad, right? And the way that we find out whether the code you wrote is bad is by being able to inspect it and being able to subject it to rigorous critique and not having structural impediments to disclosing the result of that critique or conducting that inspection. And I know that those sound like reductive or simple principles, but I think that they're also a kind of minimum viable agreement for good practice in knowledge creation and policy that should be agreeable by parties at any end of the political spectrum. You know, you can frame this as a property rights issue. It's my dishwasher. I get to choose how it works. You can frame it as a kind of anti-hegemonic issue. You know, these multinationals don't get to boss me around. You can frame it as a best practices in knowledge creation framing. So I think that there are a lot of ways that you should try to make emotive computers that help people rather than harming them. But I think that the way that we make sure that if you're wrong, those computers don't hurt people is by allowing other people to tell you what they found out and tell the people who use your computers what they found out, and to be able to change what those computers do. We have this raging debate now about our contemporary technology. Often it has to do with things like Facebook and how it takes over our attention, or Google and how it spins our results. And the people on both sides of the debate agree on something that only helps one of them. They agree that you can't have Facebook without creepiness. That's the thing that benefits Facebook a lot, because they can say, look, you love Facebook, right? The creepiness is an unfortunate but absolutely inseparable side effect, a byproduct of Facebooking. But if you believe that you can make Facebook without creepiness, then you have to say, well, then Facebook chose or stumbled into creepiness, and we can demand better of them. Or we can reconfigure Facebook to be less creepy on our end, provided that the law provides no impediment to that. We could ask our computer scientist friends to write a bot for us that scrapes everything Facebook might show us and then decide what we should see using algorithms of our own devising that uses training data we can inspect, right? We could have a competitor of Facebook do that. Remember, when Facebook launched, they gave everyone who signed up for Facebook a bot that would scrape MySpace and bring their MySpace friends' messages into Facebook so they never had to leave. And then when they replied, it would go back and post them to MySpace and say, come join me on Facebook so we can carry on this discussion. Facebook just won a lawsuit against a competitor called Power Ventures that did that. And so we have tightened the noose around what we can do. Now the thing is, I think that it will all be so great if we don't screw it up. I think that we can make non-creepy Facebooks, non-surveillant Googles, non-harassing Twitters. And if we allow third parties who have your robot and say, this robot doesn't improve my life, it makes it worse, but it has the raw materials by which my life may be improved, and we allow them to improve the robot, or we allow a third party to improve the robot on their behalf, then we can have a kind of marketplace, or a marketplace of ideas, or at least a kind of knowledge bazaar, where different ways of interacting with robots can take place. But for so long as we hew to this kind of romantic, heroic vision, where Elon Musk gets to be Iron Man, who's the singular genius and the only one who could make the things that he makes, then we end up in this world where we don't let anyone else try to release their own inner Iron Man, try to figure out how to make that robot do their bidding. So I don't know how to make your robot good, but I know how to make it so that when it's bad, we can fix it. Are there any people who identify as male or non-binary who'd like to ask the next question? Why don't you come down to the mic, sir? Thank you.
I would like you to, there's work now. I see that you're using, or you appear to be using an OS that's maybe 25 years old.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that, please?
Oh, so here's the thing is I suck at Photoshop. And so one of the things I've discovered is that if everything you do is full of big, chunky, horrible pixels, then you can make it into a feature and not a bug. So my Photoshop sucking lets me create slides. There's one I really like here. Let me see, where is it? This one. Right? This is my unbelievably bad image cropping, right? So I make my unbelievably bad image cropping look of a piece with all these other things that I can't draw or massage into having a thematic unity, because their thematic unity is like dirty, degraded, bad, blown up, over pixelated, blown out, high contrast crumminess. It's like, you know, if you got it, use it. Are there any people who identify as women or non-binary people who'd like to ask the next question? Yeah, come on down.
I've also popped down there. So you were just talking about Facebook and how we might want to demand that they remove the creepiness from their service, or we move to another service that doesn't have that creepiness if we're able to determine.
Or we modify our Facebook experience so it's not creepy.
Shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
I personally don't have Facebook, but coming to university, I'm in my first year, I've been finding it increasingly difficult to maintain that, as everyone around me is using it and finds that so important. It's not like I can suddenly demand that they'll flip the switch and come and follow me to some other service that is not creepy Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
how does that transition period look ideally?
So let me propose a thought experiment that, like, you say you're in first year.
Yes.
So maybe like maybe in like second year, you've got enough sort of chops under you, you've got some friends who can do different things, and you form a kind of like league for Facebook liberation, right? So you write a tool that is a bot that scrapes everything Facebook might show you, right? All the things on all your friends' walls, all the things that might be interesting, but it pulls it all down for you. And then it makes some choices about what you're going to see, that using tools that you devised, that you get to tweak. So it's not Facebook spying on you, trying to figure out which of your friends you want to be in touch with and how. It's you. And then when you reply, it pushes it back into their Facebook. Right, so that's like phase one, right? This is like Morlocks and Eloy, right? You know how to make a good Facebook. Everyone else is stuck in crummy Facebook. Then you package up your tool, right? And you make it into downloadable. And maybe you find some VCs in Southwestern Ontario and you say, people don't want to use crummy Facebook and they'll pay me $3 a month to not use creepy Facebook. And you raise capital to start a business. Or maybe you go to the Knight Foundation, or you go to ProPublica, and you ask for a grant to develop a free and open source version of this. Because the thing is that if we ask people to deny the pleasure that Facebook gives them, and I'm also a Facebook vegan. I actually went into my host file and mapped star.facebook.com and Instagram and WhatsApp to 00000, so I don't ever accidentally click a link to Facebook. Lips that touch Facebook will never touch mine. Whether you're fomenting revolution during the Arab Spring uprisings, or falling in love, or finding support for people who have the same rare disease as you, or part of a diasporic community and staying in touch with your relatives all over the world, those are good things, right? And it is only to Facebook's advantage to claim that those good things are inseparable from creepiness. So one of the things that toolsmiths get to do, one of the things we get to do when we have the general purpose network that allows anyone to talk to anyone else using any protocol to convey any message without any third party stopping us, and general purpose computers that can run any program we can express in symbolic logic, is we get to take other people's bad ideas about what tools we should use and fix them, right? So you are learning to be a toolsmith, so you can tool up non-creepy Facebook abstraction layer. You ever open a terminal in a programming class and it says TTY 1108 or whatever at the top? TTY stands for teletype, right? Because in the kernel is a process that was written by someone who rode to work on a dinosaur that talks to a line printer connected to an acoustic coupler. And when someone came up with a better line printer, they didn't rewrite that module, they just wrote an abstraction layer. And then they wrote an abstraction layer. It's those YouTube videos where they take a bandsaw and slice a 100-layer gobstopper in half, and you get to see all the layers, right? That TTY at the top is because somewhere in your computer is a process that still thinks it's talking to a line printer with a big clacky keyboard with those beautiful cherry switches. And you can just add another abstraction layer. That's all we do, is we add abstraction layers. It causes problems, but it also gives us these amazing solutions. It's nesting season for the Turing machines. You can run a HyperCard emulator and a Mac emulator in a browser that's doing a 68K processor emulator at the Internet Archive. And then within it, people wrote emulators in HyperCard that emulated other computers, earlier computers, Texas Instrument calculators. So you can go all the way down in emulators. You can just slap a layer on top of it and make it do what you want and bring your friends along for the ride. You solve the collective action problem that way.
Thank you.
Excellent. Are there any people who identify as male or non-binary who'd like to ask a question? Yeah, come on down. I'll just hum the Jeopardy theme.
Hi. So one of the major issues that you identified was ensuring that politicians are not using bad metaphors in their understanding of technology. Now, I would like to believe that everybody here is familiar with technology and understand how it works, but with the average age of politicians increasing and not decreasing, how do we effectively ensure that the people who are making the rules actually understand the rules that they're making?
So I think it's a danger to assume that older people don't necessarily understand computers or lack the context or capacity for it. For one thing, people who aren't traditional computer users are often, in order to use computers, they often have to be more skilled, not less, because the manufacturers don't take their use cases into account. So, you know, one of these like awful things that technologists say, and I urge you to expunge it from your vocabulary, is so easy my mom can use it, right? Because like people don't think about moms when they design computers, and so for moms to use computers, they have to torque themselves and their use case into the constraints left behind by programmers who didn't understand their use case. This is also true of people with disabilities. It's also true of people who are poor. You know, there are lots of people whose use cases are not intrinsically accommodated by their technology. The people who we have to watch out for, it's not that they're old, it's that they're powerful. Right? Like the computer that is genuinely easy to use is a computer that's so easy your boss can use it. Because when your boss can't use the computer, like I was a sysadmin, this is a boss conversation. What do you mean it's not safe for me to log into the company intranet from this computer that's in the hotel lobby, right? I need to answer my email. You make it work, Poindexter, right? So like bosses get to make everybody else make computers work in ways that fit them. And so the problem with parliamentarians is not that they're old, it's that they're privileged. And so they never have to solve their own technology problems. And so they get to exist in this like kind of rarefied world where other people make computers happen for them, right? And so how do we solve that? Well, either we have really good technology and science policy advisors in Parliament, and you know, it's not a coincidence that under G.W. Bush they shut down the Congressional Technology Advisor, and then technology policy in the US got really bad really fast. Or we start electing people who don't come from our traditional elites to Parliament, and there are lots of dividends we could realize from that aren't related to computers, but computers are, I think, one of the things we get. Thanks. Are there any people who identify as women or non-binary you'd like to ask the next question? So I work with a guy who's got a stammer. He's really smart, but every time he opens his mouth, someone jumps down his throat because he opens his mouth and he has to pause to kind of gather his thoughts. I often find that when I do this alternating thing, the 52% of the population are used to being interrupted every time they try and speak, and sometimes you just have to pause for a minute. Anyone? Going once? Going twice? All right. Are there any people who identify as male or non-binary you'd like to ask the next question? Come on down.
So with one of the big things you were talking about with how devices, that you own your device, with the whole, well, I guess not recent, but with some of the more, I guess, recent investigations and discoveries into the whole Intel management engine.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there have been a lot of people who have discovered that now it's the year of Linux on the desktop, and that it's...
Very funny.
I can't believe that. But one of the big things about it was that like there's a whole bunch of people who are like more, I guess it's more visibility on people like LibreBoot and some other that are showing off new bootloaders and UEFI alternatives. What do you think would be some of the more kind of mainstream ways around that, or what do you think is going to happen more or less with these kind of things that come to light with it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So to give you a little context, in 2001, a programmer at Microsoft, who was a security, on their security team, came up with an idea. His name was Peter Biddle. He came up with an idea called Palladium. And he said what we can do is we can add a coprocessor to the computer that's not user accessible, that verifies what the computer is doing. And it will run some programs while the computer is booting up and produce signed certificates telling you about the computer. And other computers elsewhere on the internet can ask you for your certificate and say, like, is this, what operating system is this computer running? Is it a good one? Has the operating system changed since the last time the user booted up? All kinds of amazing applications for that, right? Like, if you're a bank and you want to make sure that the computer you're about to transmit the passwords that let you clean out all of the bank's assets are going to a computer that hasn't been compromised, then maybe you want to ask that computer, what state are you in? How did you boot? What's plugged into you? How's your code been altered? And when Peter conceived of this, he came to the Electronic Frontier Foundation offices. And my colleague Seth Schoen, who's a staff technologist there, was really intrigued by it. He's a security and privacy activist. And a very gifted computer scientist. And he said, you know what this needs is an owner override button. It needs a way that the user can use the secure path to the keyboard to stop the boot process and change the attestation so that no one can ever compel a computer to tell the truth when it is in the user's interest for the computer to lie. So that when you want your computer to pretend to some other process that it's a glass teletype, that it's a terminal, that the other one doesn't go, no, you're not, you're a fully fledged modern operating system with a windowing interface, right? And Peter thought it was interesting, but no one else at Microsoft liked that idea. And so Palladium and its embodiment in something called the TPM, the Trusted Platform Module, rolled out. And Trusted Platform Module begat a series of innovations. And the latest iteration of this is something called UEFI, or UEFI. And it now uses a full-fledged system on a chip that runs next to your computer and allows like network administrators to do all kinds of useful work on the computers in their network. But it also is a full-fledged computer and has horrific security vulnerabilities that allows third parties to hack your computer in a way that your computer by design can't stop, right? And there are many people who have tried to make their own boot engines for Intel's chips and for AMD's chips and so on, that keep the good part, keep the part where you can find out what your computer is doing, but jettison the part where third parties can compel you to testify against yourself. It's just, a principle in law of very long standing that we don't make people testify against themselves. And this may be the moment, maybe, where that idea that's now 17, 18 years old bears fruit, right? Where we say, look, having coprocessors on computers that allow you to have introspection into your computer. So you're not asking your computer what state it's in, you're asking another computer what state your computer is in. That's very useful. But having that introspection be out of your control is less useful. So we can see early models of this. One of the first people to develop a fully open, from the lowest level to the highest level computers is a legendary hardware hacker. He's a colleague of mine at the MIT Media Lab named Andrew Bunny Huang. He's best known for having broken the Xbox. He runs a software and hardware company. He lives in Singapore and helps American companies do high quality, high specification hardware manufacturing in China. And he is working with Edward Snowden on a project for MIT. And it's an introspection engine for mobile devices being developed in the wake of an attack where a journalist reporting from Syria had her location leak from her phone as she was reporting in real time on the air. And the Syrian regime walked mortar fire to her until it reached the building she was in, and they killed her. So for journalists, they're making a high security phone that allows the journalist to know what the phone is doing. And it does exactly what you're describing. It has two chips. So what they have is you take the phone apart, there are 6 contact points inside an iPhone 6 that if you make contact with them, you can see all of the network traffic traversing the device, all the way down to the baseband radio. So if you can touch those 6 points and then output to something else, you can get there. So Bunny designed a very thin board that will fit between the main board of the iPhone and its case. You go to an iPhone repair shop, they open it up, they drop this board in, it makes contact in these 6 points, it dangles a ribbon cable out of the SIM slot, you plug that ribbon cable into a phone case, like a battery case, and it has an OLED screen on the back and its own system on a chip. It's fully open, it has an open bootloader, open everything all the way up. You can inspect the drivers on the USB, you can inspect everything, right? And then that shows you, that runs an inventory of the messages traversing the network bus. And importantly, it tells you when your network is active, when your phone says it's off, which is a real major threat with the security model. So introspection is amazing, right? It is a hugely powerful idea in securing our devices. And as always, the problem isn't whether our device has a capability, it's where the locus of control for that capability is. And this is, I think, what we're getting with Intel Management Engine, is this notion that putting the locus of control in hands other than the user's hands, as I was saying before, it's not that that doesn't produce good outcomes. It allows the bank, for example, to distinguish between the computer that is in a good state and the computer that's in a bad state because it was deliberately put there by an unethical employee who wants to steal all the bank's money. The problem is that in order to prevent the unethical employee from lying to the network administrator, you have to make every computer in the world vulnerable to unstoppable killer computer viruses. It's a very high price to pay. So it's not that there isn't a trade-off, it's just the wrong trade-off. And so this is where I hope we get to with Intel ME and with these other introspection systems where we use second computers to tell us what the first one is doing. Thanks for your question.
Thanks.
How are we doing for time? One or two more questions. Are there any people identify as women or non-binary you'd like to ask the next question? Okay, is there anyone else who'd like to ask the next question? Oh, you can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
In your book, Walk Away, without feeling anything, was the one location Waterloo?
Yeah, some stuff happens in Waterloo and Walk Away. Yeah, for sure. Yes. Yeah, in the Niagara Escarpment, Southwest Ontario, every book has to be set somewhere, and so setting it in a place that you sort of know is stops you from having to go do research. Excellent. Yeah, I do research backwards. I look at everything that seems interesting and try to synthesize it by making blog posts out of it, and then see what books I come up with from that, instead of coming up with a book idea and then going out and doing research for it. One last question? Come on down, sir.
Good evening.
Hi.
In the previous question, the importance of making politicians more aware of what they need to do to right the wrongs, so to speak. To bring it back in the university ambit, what are university law schools doing in terms of making their graduates aware of these issues? And are they playing catch-up? Are they on the forefront? Just how are they handling this?
It's a really mixed bag. So Stanford, for example, fantastic. Berkeley, fantastic. U of T, fantastic. One of the things that two of those universities share is they have endowments from the Glushko Samuelson charity. Bob Glushko started XML.com, and Pam Samuelson, his wife, is America's leading copyright scholar. And they endow some of the great law and information schools in the world. Other universities, not so great. Boston University's got a great deal with the Media Lab, with MIT. So MIT had this string of very shameful events where students' legitimate research got them into legal trouble and into illegitimate legal trouble. And the university hung them out to dry. Star Simpson is a good example. She was in a wearable computing lab. She had made a wearable computer. It was a thing she wore around her neck. It was a little kind of electronic necklace. And she went to the airport to pick up her partner who's flying in. And she's racialized. She's Hawaiian. She's sort of dark. And someone reported, she had short hair at the time, someone reported that a young Arab-looking man had a bomb strapped to his neck. And she was thrown to the ground and surrounded by machine guns and arrested and charged with terrorism. And the provost issued a statement before he'd even spoken to her, deploring her and saying that this isn't how they expected their researchers to conduct themselves. She never finished her undergraduate program there. In the wake of this and many other incidents, the MIT has forged a partnership with Boston University to create a legal clinic explicitly to help technology students whose research attracts legal threats, with the remit to embolden the research community at the university to go beyond that which they know to be safe and venture into the territory that they know to be legitimate. And in addition to that, they threw the world's first disobedient or forbidden research conference Snowden spoke at it. He was the first American academic in exile to give a presentation at an American university, as did Star Simpson, the woman who founded Sci-Hub. And they announced a $250,000 prize, the largest prize given at MIT for disobedient research that was endowed by Reid Hoffman. And so universities can do good on this, and the law schools can. A lot of law schools, especially with an emphasis on business law, their emphasis is on how incumbents can clobber new entrants into the market. And really, I think what law schools that are associated in some way with technology programs especially need is law schools that teach how new entrants into the market can avoid being clobbered by incumbents. And, you know, because the majority of you are not going to have jobs for life with IBM, right? You're going to end up working at 11 startups. And if the first company you work for makes you file 200 bogus patents on things that all the rest of the companies you work for then can't do, that comes right out of the money that you earn and the future you have. And so keeping those students apprised of their rights and defending them and giving them that mindset, that kind of entrepreneurial mindset, that risk-taking mindset, is an enormous service we do for them. And we sometimes see it. Brooklyn University has a law clinic where they bust crummy patents. So local New York entrepreneurs go to them and say, we're being shaken down by a patent troll. They litigate the patent and have it overturned. So all of these students are learning how to litigate crummy patents. It's great. Well, thank you all very much, and thank you again for having me and for the administrative work that went into it. I know I'm not an easy person to deal with, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.